This conference will now be recorded.
I'd like to welcome everybody to today's session. It is NSA's Professional Services Series number 42 on TWL. And I am the Vice President of Sales here at NSA, Brian Weaver, and with me is Barry Cooper, an NSA business consultant. And Barry's going to be giving our presentation today. What I'm going to do is ask that everybody stay on mute, and everyone's done a great job of that so far. As you do have questions during the session, please enter them into chat, and Barry is going to do his best to answer those as they come in. I will ask that that if you do have any questions that follow, that you certainly follow up with us. Barry has joined NSA as a senior business consultant. He has specialization in TWL and warehouse logistics. Prior to NSA, Barry was an ERP manager for a wholesale distributor and manufacturer. Barry's been working with SXC and TWL for over 24 years, and his focus is TWL implementations and upgrades, business process improvement, SXC and supporting edge applications such as LBM Axiar, Seagull Bartender, and Evante Velocity. Barry's worked with Infor SXC enterprise distribution in many versions and interfaces, among them Chewy, GUI, and WebUI and CSD. And without further ado, Barry, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Brian. And thank you, everyone, for joining today's session. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the TWL Auto Drop Rules. Why use them? What are some of the common use cases? And then, of course, any question and answers, questions that you might have, we're going to go through those. Now, I know none of you are here to watch me do a PowerPoint presentation, so we're going to just jump right over into CSD, and we're going to take a look at setting up those auto drop rules, as well as talk about those use cases. Where can they really improve the efficiency in your warehouse? So starting there, why use those auto drop rules? Well, if you have a small warehouse and the person responsible for putting orders out to the floor is also a person that's going out to the floor, doing picking, doing packing, other tasks, they don't want to have to keep going back to a terminal to drop more orders for picking. It can also be very useful when you have, even if you have somebody sitting in an office that's watching your order manager. Orders like your parcel, UPS, FedEx, that they're coming in, you want those out to the floor right away so that somebody can be picking those and getting those staged to go out the door. Auto drop allows for that to happen, and somebody doesn't have to be watching for those things. You can also get more advanced with your auto drop rules and build them out to handle your delivery schedule, so that if you are delivering to a different branch on, let's say, Monday, you can tell the system that, on Fridays, go ahead for anything that's going to either this ship to or this carrier, go ahead and drop those out to the floor all together. And then somebody can go ahead and start picking those. So it can definitely improve the efficiency in your warehouse so that somebody's not having to sit behind a computer screen and watch for that. Your auto drop rules can be very simplistic. I'm just watching for a specific carrier, and I want those to go out to the floor. Or you can build them with additional logic to look for this carrier, maybe this ship to name. There's a wide variety of fields that you can go and look at to set that criteria. Okay, so how do we set these up, right? How do we get going with our auto drop rules? Now, I'm showing this inside of CSD, but this applies back to even the online version of TWL. The steps are the same. The screens just might look a little bit different, but all the steps are still the same. So we're going to look at, first we have to enable our TWL auto drop. Now with CSD, we don't actually have to do this step, but if we're in an older version, we do have to enable our auto drop rules first. So when we go in to enable our auto drop rules, what it's looking for here is setting up a printer to use for the auto drop. Now, this doesn't have to be an actual physical printer that you're using, but it does have to be a valid printer set up in SASP. So if we're not using our carriers to print our pack list after we're done, this printer here can be used to print those packing lists. Again, in CSD, we don't need to do this step. Their auto drop rules are automatically enabled. That's it. That's all that's needed to get going with auto drop rules. Then simply the next step is to create them. And we do that in our TWL Auto Drop Rules. We can click in here and we can see for my warehouse, my TWL enabled warehouse, I've got a handful out there. I can have as few as one. I can have many of these. I could have hundreds of auto drop rules if I'm getting very complex with them and I want auto drop to handle my entire delivery schedule, and because I don't want somebody sitting behind a desk watching the order manager full time. You don't have to, even if I have an auto drop rule set up, I still can go into the order manager and drop orders ahead of the auto drop schedule. So even though I have these set up, I'm not being handcuffed by that. I still have that manual ability to go and drop those orders. So to create a new rule, all we need to do is click on the new here. And of course, we have to give it a rule code. What is my rule doing, right? That's I want to give it a name that makes sense to me so that if I come back in here later, I know what the rule was trying to do. So here I'm going to call, this one, this is my parcel rule. And you'll notice that the company and warehouse default based off of how I've already logged in. So I don't need to worry about setting those. We click save, and now it takes us into the auto drop rule itself. Here's where I get to set my criteria on how the rule is going to operate. What orders am I looking for? And once I have that set, then I can set when is this rule going to fire. I can tell it I want it to fire immediately. So as those orders come into the order manager, it's going to immediately fire this rule and send it to the floor. I can tell it that I only want this rule to work on certain days of the week. And when I select a day of the week, I also have options of saying, I only want it to fire at this very specific time. And I can set up to 6 different times for that day or days for this rule to fire. So I may have, I may want to say at 7 a.m. I want it to drop these orders. Then at 10 a.m. I want it to do it again, and 2 p.m. So I can have it throughout the day where this rule, it's essentially batching my orders up and then dropping them out to the RF units. Or I have the option to say, I want it to execute every so many hours or minutes. So I can say, go ahead and execute this rule every 1 minute, every 5 minutes, or once an hour. And it'll continue to do that through the start and stop time that I can set. So not only can I control the days of the week that this rule is going to fire, I can control how often and when it starts and stops. So think in the case of getting like a parcel, something going out UPS or FedEx, where if UPS is picking up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in your warehouse, I may not want my rule firing after that point, because then it's just going to sit around and it's not going to get shipped out. And that's where I could, if UPS is late and I'm trying to sneak something in, I could manually go drop that order. So I could say, don't start until 7 a.m. in the morning, and I want you to stop at 3 p.m. In the afternoon. Okay. So now, but how do we actually select our criteria? So here up on top, we've got a field name chooser, and I can click on the lookup here, and I'm just going to do a full search, and it's going to show me that there are 102 fields that I can write rules against. I can choose against, and you can see. So that's a lot of fields that I can go and look for data to drop my orders to the floor. Okay. Now, obviously, some of the more common ones are going to be, the carrier or ship to name, even route. If I'm looking for, again, my parcel, I can go and select my carrier. And I select that, and you'll see it fills that into my criteria selection box here. So it says carrier equals, and now I simply click over there and I tell it, what does it equal? Now, essentially, I am writing a statement, but I don't need to worry about having, does this need to be in quotes because it's, a text box versus a numeric. I don't have to be concerned with that because the system itself is going to handle that. It knows that this field is a text box, and it will automatically assign the quotes around what I'm looking for. So it'll write the statement for me. So all I have to say is carrier equals, and I can type that in. So I can say carrier equals UPS. Now, again, if this is a very simple, this is all I'm trying to do, I can leave it at that. I can say then, if carrier equals UPS, immediately drop it, and I can save my rule. And whenever my order manager gets a new order in that has a carrier that equals UPS, it will drop it to the floor and create that wave. Okay. Now I can get more complex with that. And I can say, you know what, it carrier equals UPS, and now I can go and select yet another field to add into that. And I can say, I can select that same carrier and say, maybe it's going to equal UPS-G because it's UPS ground, or UPS A for next day air or something, right? I can have more than one criteria in my rule. I could also say carrier equals UPS, and it's going to equal something else. So maybe I wanted to say, my ship to name. I'm looking for very specific, more specific order itself that I then want to drop to the floor. Okay, my filters that I can use here, I've got or and. I can use contains. If I'm doing an indexed field, I can use contains. I can also use begins. So if I wanted to say it, the field I'm looking for begins with, so like in a ship to name, it begins with this. Or I could even say it matches this. So I've got a few criteria here, or filters that I can use in my statements. typically, you're going to see that we're going to be using our equals more than anything else, equals this, and then and to go with it. And or are going to be your typical options there. Okay. Now, I'm going to back out of this one here, and I'm just going to show you here a more complex one. So I've got this rule where ship to name begins with, in this case, I chose Barry for me, and the total line quantity is greater than 1. I'm going to go ahead and send that down to the floor. So if the order came in for me and there was only a line quantity of 1, it would remain inside of the order manager waiting for somebody to manually drop that. I have my rule firing on Mondays every 1 hour between 1 a.m. and 1 p.m. And we'll see that we have our next execution date, which of course this is out in my demo environment, so not everything is firing on a daily basis, but we'll be able to see that and we'll know when the rule is going to fire next. Okay, so again, kind of, why use something like this? Again, our parcel orders, it works very, very well with this, where we're not looking at these in our order manager. We're not trying to group things together. Typically, we just, they come in, we want them out to the floor, somebody picking them and staging that material to go out. So here I've got one where I've said carrier begins with UPS, because I might have multiple carriers all around that UPS determining, again, UPS ground versus next day air versus, 2-day air. So I don't want to have specific rules for each one of those. So I've just said it begins with UPS. Go ahead, again, I'm firing this rule every day of the week at a very specific time. Okay. Some other good common use for these are if you've got like a counter sales environment, customer pickups or will calls, where once you get those orders in your warehouse, typically your customer is coming in, within a reasonable amount of time to pick that up. You don't want them to wait while you go and gather that material. So you can have that auto drop rule looking for your customer pickups, your will calls, even your counter sales, automatically dropping that right to the RF so that somebody can get working on that. Warehouse transfers, again, another very good use for auto drop rules, so that I have a schedule for my warehouse transfers, right? I know when it's going from one branch to another. I can set my auto drop rule to look for those, batch them all together, and drop them to the floor so that they can start working on those. All right. So taking a look here at another rule that, using the or. So here I've got a carrier equals OT, so our truck, or carrier equals UPS. Again, I'm trying to, instead of having multiple rules to handle the logic, I've built it into a single rule to say it can be this or this, and go ahead and send that to the floor. I'm going to back out here, and as I go in, and I'm not going to edit it this time, you'll see that I have a test rule button. So once I've got my rule written, I can test my rule, and it's going to tell me how many orders that are currently sitting in my order manager that match this, and it's going to show me the entire query itself. So we see that I only wrote carrier equals OT or carrier equals UPS, but what the system is seeing is it's looking at the company that I'm in, the warehouse that I'm in. It's making sure that it's not already dropped to a wave to look at that. And then it's adding in my criteria of our truck or UPS. And you'll see it's handling all of the quotes and the syntax correctly. So I don't have to be a programmer to know how to write these. Right? The system will help you and guide you right through this.
Hey, Barry, we have a question if you want to take it.
Sure.
Great. So Lewis asked a question. Thank you, Lewis. Is there any reason why immediate drops work and specific time criteria will not work?
Can you say that again?
Is there any reason why immediate drops work and specific time criteria will not work?
Yes, there is. So when you look at an immediate drop, why use that versus the specific time criteria? So here, my rule is saying that it's UPS, but I'm not saying anything about the customer. So if I'm getting in, say, 5 orders for UPS, all going to 5 different customers, by using immediate drop, as those come in, it's going to send those down. So the likelihood that they would be in the same wave would be very small. Using a specific time drop or even the every so many minutes drop, it's going to batch these together and it's going to drop them to one wave. So you would end up with, even though it's 5 UPS orders, you would end up with one wave with all 5 of those. Depending on how you handle the actual shipping, if the picker is bringing it to a staging area, somebody else is doing the final packing and the final shipment, and they can break that apart, then that's okay having those all in the same wave because you've made one pass through your warehouse to get all of those. But if it's going from picking, packing, shipping all in one straight line, you would want those broken apart so that I pick this one order, I package it, and I ship it out. And I'm not risking mixing it in with another customer's order. So it really comes down to what does your warehouse process look like as to, do I want to do an immediate drop versus a time frame, or do I want to get more specific in my criteria to help alleviate that, to say, well, I want to do specific times, but I don't want multiple customers being batched in together. This is a great question.
Yeah, Barry, we have another one if you want to take a second. So this one's from Michael. Can we add criteria in to sum up the total lines to 30 line waves? And there's a follow-up too.
Okay, so I figured this question would be coming, and unfortunately, this criteria can only look at a single order at a time. So you can't say if the customer equals this and then start looking at other orders that customer would have and batch those to set your criteria. It looks at one order at a time.
Okay. And the follow-up question is, can we also add in WH_zone to control the items within waves?
Unfortunately, the zone is not available there. So when we look at our list, we can only go by what fields it's showing us here in the full list, and warehouse zone of the item itself is not available.
Okay, that's all we have at the moment. Thank you.
Okay. So along with, look at being able to look at multiple orders to write the criteria, one of the things that may come up is as you look at your TWL system parameters, you say, well, there's a wave size parameter. If I set that to 1, will the auto drop rules affect that? And unfortunately, that parameter actually does not apply to auto drop rules. So even if you have your wave limit set to 1 or 2 or 4, auto drop is going to ignore that, and whatever it's met will get, if there's 10 orders that meet the criteria, all 10 are going to go into one wave. Okay, so now we're going to go through it. We're going to actually finish creating a rule here, and we're going to show what happens. So I'm gonna choose my field here, and I do highly recommend making sure that you choose from the list versus just going in and typing into the box here, just because if you make a typo, it can be very frustrating because you're gonna get errors back, and you may not know why you're getting those errors back, because sometimes when we type things, our brain and our eyes see things the way we want to versus what they actually are. So here, again, I'm going to do my carrier equals UPS. I'm going to say Monday every 1 minute. I want it to start, sure, 1 a.m. And I want this to stop at 1 p.m. I have my rule ready to go. You'll notice my test rule button is not available to me. When I click save here, now it's going to show me, it's going to test that rule for me, and it's going to tell me 3 orders match that, and again, I get to see this criteria. I can accept that, or I can back out of that. So I can click OK, and now it's successfully taken that rule for me. I haven't activated that rule yet. I've simply created the rule and I have it ready to go. It's not until I actually click the active button will this rule start applying. So once I make it active, then you'll notice here my execution time kicked in. So 8:29, so tomorrow, because we're after 1 p.m. today, this rule will start firing and my orders will get dropped to the RF unit. Now, if I make a mistake and I manually type in here and I typed in, I manually typed it, or I've tried to do something that it doesn't like, when I click save, now instead of getting, hey, here's the orders that match, now I'm getting an invalid criteria for that rule. And I can look at this and it's gonna try to do a good job of telling me what's wrong, but it may not always be able to tell you exactly what's wrong. Okay, and at this point, then I can click OK. It's going to save that, or I could click cancel, and it would go back and let me edit this. Now, this rule doesn't work, but I still went through with the process. It's going to continue to error out if I were to make this active. So you want to make sure that when you're saving this, that everything is validating clean, and hopefully you have some orders in your order manager that match the criteria, and you can go and validate that and say, sure enough, there are 3 orders available that match this criteria. Okay, so again, we want to make sure that we click active to make this active. And if we jump over here to my order manager, And there we go. If we go look at my UPS, we'll see that when I did have it incorrectly, I indeed have 3 orders that match that. Okay. One thing that you want to be aware of is that if you have orders that are coming in with comments, right, and those comments are something that who's ever dropped, your order manager person, who's ever monitoring this, would normally be looking at this and, deciding on those comments, hey, I got to do something, or I got to contact somebody before this goes to the floor. These auto drop rules are just going to go ahead and send it. And they may, these comments are still going to show in the RF unit, but to the person who's dropping those, they're not going to see that. So if you have very complex rules for how you're dropping, maybe you're not dropping things until they reach a certain weight or a certain combined line total, those auto drop rules are not going to work well for you. They're really meant for that the order is going to come in and it's just going to go right to the floor for someone to go pick. Okay. All right. So now that we've kind of gone through the setups, we've activated our rule. How do I know what it's doing? There is a log that we can look at here. So we have our auto drop log that's going to show us what's going on. So we have everything set up, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're just going to walk away and trust, right? Sometimes we want to verify, or we want to double check who did this, why did this happen? We have an auto drop log that's going to show you what's going on, so that we can look at that, see if the auto drop rule actually dropped it, or if that rule is having a problem and it's not running for some reason. And if your log file starts to get to be too many, or you're not really sure if this is relevant anymore, you can delete these log files and start fresh. And there's a file retention parameter that controls how long are you keeping these. So you can keep an eye on what's going on. And you'll see here, like this one here, my rules for W key fired, and it dropped 3 orders. And I can dig into that and see what those all are through a report. Or I can know, all right, my rule is firing correctly. It's finding things. Everything is going the way it should. Okay. So, and again, I'm doing this in CSD. Anybody that's back in previous versions of this, the functionality is the same. The screens are going to be laid out a little bit different, but the actual steps of setting up your auto drop rule are the same. All right. Well, that's really all I have around the auto drop. Again, it's a great way to improve the efficiency and just take that simplistic task off of somebody's hands, so they don't have to be sitting there at a desk monitoring it all the time, right? That it's something they can come back to, verify maybe, again, if your UPS cutoff is say 3 o'clock, maybe they double check it at 2:45 just to make sure everything dropped, that there wasn't an inventory discrepancy, because those would go into the exception manager because it's unable to drop those. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, Barry, we have one more here. So Yeah, Lauren, thank you for asking. Is there any consideration we should have for the start and end times entered for CSD? I ask because there have been issues with entering times in other functions. I believe there is a 6-hour difference.
Yeah, time inside of CSD, that's an interesting one. You do want to be cognizant of this time, and it's going to kind of come into play with there is a new AO setting that's out there. And let me jump over there real quick. And I gotta try to remember where that is. Yep. In your system general, so depending on what you have set here for system, if you have this checked, you now have the option to include TWL into that time zones. So if you're doing this, then you got to make sure that your times that you're setting in there match that. Otherwise, if you're not doing this, it's going to fire based off of the server time. So not your local time. So yes, you would have to adjust those accordingly then. But if you're using your client's time zone here on your system records, then if you include TWL into there, it should then use your time zone here. And when you check this, it's going to show you all of your available TWL warehouses, and you can then set the time zone in those warehouses.
Yeah, we're having some excellent questions so far, so keep them coming, guys. I do have a few more, Barry.
Okay.
So can you assign pickers to waves when auto dropped?
Absolutely. So when you have your auto drop rule, up in the top right, we've got our 3 little dots here. We can click on that and we have the assign employees. So we can go into there and we can choose which employees are going to be assigned to those waves.
Okay, great. I got a couple more as well. Is there a way to see what history of the auto drop rule?
Yep, and we kind of went through that a little bit earlier. There is an auto drop log, as well as some reporting in the TWL reports that will show you not only your auto drop rules, but the actual auto drop log itself, and show you all of the orders that are there.
Okay.
That one's underneath management.
Okay, and the next one I have is, does system parameter 2000 wave size apply to auto drop rules?
Yeah, and we kind of touched on that a little bit earlier as well. Unfortunately, that parameter does not apply to the auto drops. So again, if you have, your wave size are limited to a small number, auto drop is going to just use however many orders it finds that meets that criteria.
Okay, I've got another question for you as well. This one is coming in from Akira. What does criteria type list rule do? I see criteria type list in parentheses CRTXWHEXSD set up in our system. What does that mean?
I would have to look at that one to tell you off top of my head. If you send me a screenshot of that, I could answer that for you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so please do that, and we'll get an answer back for you. So thank you for that question. All right, at this point, I don't have any others. Any other questions from anybody? These are all great. Okay, Barry, I think that we're good. Is there any final elements you want to make mention of before we wrap?
Well, I just wanted to thank everybody for joining today's session. I hope you found it useful. And if you're not using auto drop rules, this maybe at least gets the conversation going about, hey, should we be using these? And if you do have questions, absolutely, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can get those answered.
Yeah, thank you so much for attending, folks, and thank you for all the excellent questions. Again, you'll be receiving a recorded session here in the next couple of days, and please feel free to reach back to Barry and I with any follow-up if you've got interest in knowing anything further or in us being able to assist you in any way in this arena. Thank you so much, and thank you for the time. You have the rest of your time back for the top of the hour here, and thank you so much for attending.